Hello and welcome. You're watching Hindustan Times. Have political relations between Europe and the US hit a new low? Washington's scathing assessment of the continent in a new security review says Europe faces quote-unquote civilizational erasure. And this is according to the document and its disregard for European concerns in ceasefire talks in Ukraine that are driving frustrations with the Trump administration to new levels. So our question is, are transatlantic relations on thin ice? Steven Beardsley of DW gets us a report from Berlin. Steven, good to have you. The Trump administration has rarely had much good to say about Europe. What is it that makes the past few days so bad?
That's right. We know that Europe is certainly accustomed to having arguments with this administration over the past 12 months, especially when we look at trade, when we look at the nature of military spending and burden sharing with NATO. However, what's happened over the past few months has really cast a much darker shadow over the continent and over transatlantic relationships. When we see Washington trying to rush through a ceasefire deal in Ukraine using a lot of Russian talking points, especially when it comes to things like Russian elections or giving over territory. When we see this strategy review that again borrows talking points not only from the Kremlin, but from populist parties that are gaining ground here in Europe. And then when we see this interview with Donald Trump on Tuesday, in which he again reiterated, Europe is decaying and really questioning the value of that alliance, that causes a lot of consternation here. So far, the responses from top European leaders have been more measured, most likely because they're focused on that ceasefire deal and the negotiations. We see the top EU diplomat Kaja Kallas saying she still sees a strong alliance between the two sides. We see German Chancellor Friedrich Merz saying that some of these complaints are in fact understandable. But we imagine that in private, the feelings are probably a lot harsher. Maybe they echo those of Josep Borrell. He is the predecessor to Kallas, and he tweeted on Tuesday that it's time for Europe to essentially see the US as a kind of adversary.
The Trump administration's harsh assessment is also likely to find agreement in some corners of the continent itself. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that is fair to say, and not just in remote corners. Populist parties have been doing well here in Europe, especially in recent years, and especially here in Germany over the past 12 months. When we look at the populist party, the AfD, Alternative for Germany, we see that it's polling now as the highest party and has been doing that for several months. This strategy review from the U.S. essentially borrows language from populist parties like the AfD, talking about civilizational erasure in Europe, really looking at Europe according to the amount of whiteness that's there and looking at anti-migrant, anti-asylum policies in nations like Hungary and Poland with praise. That's something that bothers a lot of people here. Not only that, but the strategy review says that it will also continue to cultivate resistance to what it sees as odious ideas across Europe. And that means that it will support those populist parties. And that's really problematic here in Europe, which sees those populist parties as undermining basic democratic rights and essential freedoms.
Also, Steven, are we seeing a slow motion rupture in the transatlantic relationship as we know it?
I think when you look at the rest of that strategy review, one of the things that you understand is that this is an administration that is less interested in values and ideas-based alliances. And taking maybe the worst case outlook of the transatlantic alliance over the past decades, that is in essence what it has become, is a bit more values and ideas based. That is important, many would argue, as a kind of soft power support. That's what past administrations have supported. But this is an administration that really is interested in hard power transactional relationships and may have a much different view of the world than the one that's been encouraged over past administrations. And so I think even if you take the view that Trump himself is transactional and may not be interested in great ideological views of the transatlantic alliance, we see that there are definitely some within this administration that do have a very negative view of Europe, and not just one that's transactional. And I think that's the bigger concern for Europe going forward, is that there is, in fact, a kind of adversarial outlook on Europe that we see reflected in this review.
All right, Steven, thank you so much for that report from Berlin.